Hello, fans of the RPG Fanatic Show. This is Kerry Martell. Since I'm taking a bit of a break to rethink the format, I have a question for my subscribers. I know some of you are tabletop gamers, and I happen to have a tabletop system that I've been working on for a couple years now, really just polishing it bit by bit. There's a lot of things I designed in the past that I thought could have been done better, so I've really held off from showing this to too many people. I've been working on it at least 3 years, I suppose. So it's called Radiant Fantasia. It's an OGL game, open game license. It's based on the Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, more particularly 3.5 rule set, but I've made some heavy modifications to it. One of the first is that it doesn't use an array of dice. It uses only 2d6 to determine everything. Why did I choose 2d6? There's mathematical reasons involved. I wanted to make a game that had a little bit more control over the results. But the biggest reason is that I thought that using multiple types of dice made the game harder for people to get into because they have to have all these different dice that aren't really sold in general stores. So I wanted you to basically be able to use Monopoly dice to do it. But otherwise, the core mechanics of the system is identical. I've simply changed around a lot of the numbers to balance it for 2d6. Another thing is that I've changed how classes work. There's jobs, which is the main category of a job of a class your character has. And there's specializations, which are subclasses that your character can also take. It's kind of like a prestige class, only the difference here is that you don't have to choose whether to level up a subclass or not. You can always take on the abilities of one of these other classes and take on the abilities of the class that's your main class. So really, there isn't like multiple levels for each class. There's only the character class, and at certain character levels, you can take on additional specializations. You're free to spend your skill points into whatever classes abilities you like. And there's also a talent system that is somewhat borrowed from the system that was used in Star Wars Saga. Let's go down here to character jobs, and I'll show you what I mean. We'll go down to the Doctor, which is basically the character that's mostly specialized in assisting other characters. And there's talents. There's a Surgeon talent tree, the Apothecary talent tree, and the Therapist talent tree. And the way that I designed these talent trees is that I basically try to take an archetype. Like, let's take the Doctor, for example. The Doctor is a generic healer. And there's 3 different talents that he can go down, routes, basically, if you will. He's got the Surgeon tree, which specializes in treating life-threatening injuries. Then he has the Apothecary tree, which is really focused on administering medicine and buffing that, your use of resources, basically. And then there's the Therapist talent tree, which deals with healing things that you wouldn't normally associate with a medic type of class. They treat injuries of the mind. They deal with magical injuries and stuff like that. So another example would be you take the Hunter, which is basically our generic ranger archetype, but a lot can be done with a ranger type of class. So we have the Ranger talent tree, which is very much focused on the wilderness survival aspect. There's got a lot of abilities that are the typical ranger abilities, like survival, and he's also got the Greatest Game, which is basically his favored foe ability. There's also the Trainer talent tree, which specializes in recruiting animals and using NPC animals as an ally. And there's a Stalker talent tree, which is really focused on not being detected, on camouflaging and deflecting. It's defensive abilities mostly. This, of course, is not showing the full talent tree. This beginner's book that I have right here is really just focused on levels 1 through 5. The full rule set of this thing is like 800-something pages. So I was trying to start breaking it down into something like the Essentials line, but even still, I need to break it down further, because this book ended up being 413 pages. So if I ever release this thing, it's probably going to be a lot smaller. And I just want to sell, if I sell at all, I would have books for each type of class. Like there would be something like the Essentials, like I said before, where it's the fighters are in one book, and then there's the people who are a little bit more stealth-oriented in one book. So the Hunter and the Vagrant, for example, would be in one book, and the Warrior and the Noble would probably be in one book. And then the Doctor and Servant would be in a different book. Servant's actually a really unique class. It's tied in very much with the Noble class that I have here. The Noble is a class which first appeared in Star Wars Saga for me. It's a class that's really focused on being a richer character than everyone else, an aristocrat character. I have different lines here that I have. I have the Diplomat, which is specialized in social maneuvering. So the game's not entirely about combat. There's also the options to do things like have the diplomacy skill really involved in stuff. And even there are some abilities to also use that during combat. There's a Swashbuckler talent tree, which is basically his combat leadership skills. And there's an Aristocrat. I have to fix that. Spelling error. But this Aristocrat tree, he's really specialized in the prestige and social standing of bossing people around. Just some generic abilities. You also get some leadership stuff, like the I'm better than you, probably talent, which gives him bonuses charm checks against non-nobles of his own race. But, and there's stuff like the Follow Me, where he can form an entourage. But anyway, there's a Servant class, which is one that I've pretty much designed myself. It's a class that's basically a butler. And he's got unique abilities that are oriented toward being a servant. It's services. Started every day, the servant gains 5 service points they can spend on service actions. The servant cannot gain more than 5 service points, even if they didn't spend all their points the previous day. And they can use the servant points to power various abilities that help them with their help them serve their master, basically. And they can be combat role oriented, or they can be non-combat oriented. So it's basically the idea that what's a good example? The noble class would be like Don Quixote, and the servant would be Sancho, basically, if you were to use these in some sort of campaign setting situation. But as I said, there's also specializations. There's the common specializations, which anybody can use to bolster, if you will, their primary class, their job. This stuff is Adventure Alchemist. There's a Ninja one. But then there's one that are specifically for certain types of races. There's one for humans, which is the Falconer, Knight Errant. The Reputable Wizard, which is neat because they start out with an elemental pack, so they already can do magic, which normally humans can't do, unless they have already forged an elemental pack with a spirit. Then there's Paladins and Priests, which have a lot of restrictions on them, actually, more so than you would find in a typical game due to the unique world setting of this game. Then there's Elementals, which is kind of unique, I think, compared to a lot of other D&D derived games. I have a lot of emphasis on being able to play elemental classes, characters that are not human, so demi-humans in a way. And they have their own classes associated with them as well, like such as being a familiar who can forge elemental packs with humans, and an artificer, which is very focused on making magical items, and the champion, which is a fighter, and then there's a sage, which is very kind of inspired very much by the wild mage from AD&D. I haven't seen it a lot in other editions, but the sage is basically a wild, but he has a lot of abilities focused on bolstering his party members as well. Looking at the races, again, to backtrack a bit, have human cultures. So there's multiple types of humans you can play as. We got the Bohemians, which is very much your hippies, and then your Gluscobians, which is kind of like your generic European type of character. And then there's the Gondorians, which is kind of your Asian melting pot, if you will, of various cultures. And there's the Messeranians, which is the Middle Eastern type of characters. And then there's the Rodondians, which is kind of like a combination of Native Americans and Africans. There are also elemental races you can play as. I've got an original one here I created called the Bicorn, which is basically the male counterpart of a unicorn. In my system, unicorns are all girls. So there's the Bicorn, which is shadow aligned, as the unicorn is light aligned. And they have a few various abilities, which are kind of unique, I think. They have the ability to null wish. Unicorns have the ability to grant wishes. which can be very powerful, but it's meant for limited situations. But the bicorns act as a foil to that. They can null the wish. There's also dryads and dwarves, but of course my dwarves are probably a little bit more like the earthen and WoW. I have a note here, which I'll eventually take out, but it was just to give the artist feedback. There's also a mermaid, and they have the ability to be in water. They have not fish legs with a fin, but on land they can polymorph their tails into a pair of human legs, so that they can venture around on land. I've also got things like a sylph. There's characters of multiple sizes that you can play as, and that's due to some serious modifications I've done to how weapons work. But in my system, you can have characters who are tiny, adventuring with giant-sized characters, and it won't cause any mechanical problems with the system. Speaking of which, here's some of the modifications I've done to the items with weapons. Least sizes. So their weapon has a base power depending upon their size. For tiny, it's 1, and for gargantuan, it's 6. And the critical remains at 12. And damage can never be lower than 1 for a weapon, no matter what you do to it. There's, of course, the generic bludgeoning damage and piercing damage, the types of damage, basically. Weapons are divided into melee, natural weapons, siege weapons, and so forth. But there's also weapon types. This eventually falls under what kind of techniques they can do with that weapon. There's axes and hammers and battle gloves and all kinds of stuff. And the system I have is very modular for making items. D&D's one of its biggest drawbacks, and this is true for a lot of systems actually, is that it doesn't have a modular system for creating items, brand new items. Not for characters creating them, but for GM actually creating the items and wanting to do something unique. There's no system to balance these new items the GM has invented. So I've created a system that allows you to balance it. And how it's balanced is by how complex the item is to make and how much it costs to buy the base item itself before you've done a huge amount of modifications to it and so forth. You do this by adding qualities to the item. Like, for example, the balance quality here adds a +5 Zenny value, the official currency of the system, and 2 complexity. And the balance thing makes a weapon treated as a lightweight weapon for the character size it is created for. So basically, it's like having the weapon finesse feat. And then there's things that are negative qualities. Let's see. Let's find one that reduce the complexity and reduce the Zenny cost. Like, for example, team. This quality can only be applied to a siege class weapon. The weapon requires more than one person to operate it. So that's a negative drawback that reduces the cost of that weapon, and that helps make things like cannons, for example, not ridiculously expensive if you're trying to equip your airship or something. Another example of a particular weapon is created with my system, so that you can really see the flexibility of it. Going to axes, like this is a throwing axe right here. It's got a critical range of 12 and a damage type slash and so forth. And this is all determined by the qualities that it has. It's a blade and it's thrown, and I've determined that it has this weapon class of an axe. And this all has a complexity of 3, and it has durability of 5. Its reach is 1. The reach has to do with whether it's ranged or not, basically. Another example, let's go down to our swords. I've got all kinds of different swords that I've made using this system by adding qualities to it. Weapon damage of 2 gives it more damage. And it has sundering, so you can use this to disarm a weapon. It adds a bonus, basically, to disarm attacks. You can also use this system for making armor. The armor has its own qualities. And I've also got equipment. Equipment has its own qualities as well that allow you to make a wide variety of everything from consumables to other types of equipment, such as bags. There's qualities that allow you to have a quality of space that determines how much bag space an object can have, basically. So you can make all kinds of stuff, and it's all balanced because it'll tell you how much Zenny it costs and how complex the item is for somebody to make. So I think that's one of the key strengths of the system I've designed. I've also got something that allows characters to customize items, which is the item augment slots. So items have slots, and you can add augments to them based upon how many slots are available. And there's a variety of different slots. There's enchantments, there's buttresses, which are done by blacksmiths, there's curses, there's blessings, attachments made by engineers. There's all kinds of stuff that's not covered just in this book. But it's kind of, if you might think of like materia, like slotting materia, it's kind of like that. Kind of like how Diablo did its gem system. And it's kind of like that, but it's not just like one particular object you're putting in there. It could be all kinds of stuff. And what determines the slots is primarily determined by the material that an item is made out of. Dragon Scales has 3 slots. And other stuff has less, like a common material, like just made out of generic wood or iron, has 1 slot, but Orichalcum has 3 slots. Anyway, let's go on to. I mentioned this before, but there's techniques that your characters can use, and this I think is another strength of my system. It makes it so that fighters, melee-oriented characters, are still balanced with magic wielding characters. So there's weapon techniques. As an example, let's go down to our axes. So this is an attack that can only be used with an axe. It's called Fissure. So it has a bit of a ranged attack that allows them to throw magical energy with an axe. But there's also other abilities like Leg Chopper, which is an attack to the legs, which makes them fall to the ground prone for 1 turn. And there's other stuff as well. One of my favorite techniques, I think, is under the whip proficiency, where I've named some of this stuff after various Castlevania games. So you have your whip, and you got an attack that lets you do extra damage to animals, called Punisher. And this attack can only be used against beasts and magical beast characters. There's a lot of the stuff doesn't have magic point cost with it, but it does have heavy delays, so you can only use it like with Punisher. There's a delay of 1 round, so after 1 round, it basically has to cool down until it can be used again. There's also spells, of course, and spells are basically treated like a technique. Only they have a higher cost with magic, and they usually have to have some sort of delay. They have a longer delay, usually. And rather than going after someone's defense, it's a skill check versus magic defense, which is another difference with my system than the OGL system. You can invest skill points into either your general skills, like hide or climb or whatever. And you can also invest them into your techniques as well. And that increases the attack roll, basically, your success to have it work against somebody's defense. D&D was before spells were way overpowered, in my opinion, because you just had to go to a generic difficulty check for it to work. And a lot of skills, you didn't even have to have a difficulty check. There was very little ways for anybody to avoid getting attacked, basically. Spells were like they're just overpowered. So I've made it so that in order for you to actually hit somebody with a spell, you need to do a attack roll with your spell and go against somebody's magic defense. Now, some other changes I've done is I've really gone back to the older D&D way of having resistances. Go into character creation, and you'll be able to see where it is. Where the hell is it? Your base defenses, and then... Oh, something I tried to go back to with the older original Dungeons & Dragons system is that they had character resistances. And they were very specific. There was ones against, like, acid, for example. I tried to be a little bit more broad here, but there's still more resistances than the 3 that you had in 3.5, the OGL system. I've got physical, mental, poison, disease, and fear. And I think this works a lot better because you're able to itemize your character to have better resistances against specific traits. It just makes it a little bit more tactical in the system than just trying to like buff everything else. 3 scores basically. There's no evade score or something like that. I mean, if you're getting attacked by poison, then you need to check your resistance against poison, not like your body defense or whatever. A lot of systems are like that. I don't like that systems. I want to, if you have a character who might be highly resistant to diseases, but that's not the same thing as a poison. So it should be treated differently. In my opinion, that's what I've done with my system. Also, for mental defense, a character's ability to resist fear should be separate from their ability to resist mental attacks. I just don't like that about OGL, so I've separated them up. Another change I've done, Pathfinder handled this a different way than I did. They had a special maneuvers ability, basically. Not ability, but stat. I have grapple attack and grapple defense. So grappling is treated just like any other attack roll in the game. You take your grapple attack value and you compare it to your opponent's grapple defense. And if you win, then you're engaged in a grapple with them. And it's very simple. I mean, the grappling system in OGL was just way complex. And I've simplified it a lot. And there's techniques. There's some techniques that you can actually perform while you're in a grapple with somebody. A lot of them are contained under the fist, the hand-to-hand, basically, skills. And your opponent can also defend against them, but he has to use his grapple defense to defend against them. It's a lot less complex than in OGL. Another system that I've changed a lot is how characters are made, NPC characters in particular. I'll bring up my... this is all still very much scratch. I'm still putting it together, really. But there's a system called FantasyCraft I liked a lot. And I borrowed elements from that to make my system. So basically what you have is you have your NPC template stat block, which is your generic set of skills and attributes that an NPC has. You take that and you put it into... you compare it to a number of charts. If you were to do this by hand, we're going to have an application for this. If I actually release it, there'd be an application you can enter. So you don't have to do it all by hand. But basically, you'll enter this into an app, and then it will spit out an actual level stat block, which will be what that character's parameters are for that level. So as an example, rather than have like a level 1 kobold, and that character is always level 1, and if you want to change him to like level 5, then you have to basically do all the math yourself by hand and try to figure out what he should have at level 5. You don't have to do that. You just have one NPC stat block for a kobold, and then you put his information into the calculator, and then you drag and drop down to like level 5, and then it spits out his stats at level 5. And how this is achieved is basically the same way they do it in like the Elder Scrolls. There's scaling tables, basically. Every character has a variety of attributes, like an initiative value and a defense value, an attack value, resilience value, competence value, stuff like that. And each of these values have grades, 1 through... I've got pretty high here, actually. I'll probably have to reduce some of this stuff, because I just think it's unnecessary the more I think about it. But anyway, it's pretty... you can very much customize characters. So basically what the grade is determines what their actual stats will be. As an example, let's say you want a kobold to have a defense of 3, right? So, and you want to do like level 5. Well, he would have +4 defense at that level. But if he was level 1, he'd just have a level 1 defense. And that's basically how that system works. It's really not that... It seems really obvious to me this is how D&D should work. This is how every tabletop game should work. And FantasyCraft, I think, is one of the first to just taken this obvious thing and do it. So I base my system basically off of FantasyCraft. But I've made a lot of changes as well. There's some things that FantasyCraft doesn't do that I like. And one of it is signature skills. I basically, because of my skill system, the techniques... you have to have an XP value attached to every ability that a character can have in the game. And I wanted to basically have a system where you can create custom NPC attacks and have that increase how much XP that they're worth. And by result, how much XP they can actually be added to an encounter budget. So, as an example, let's see if I can find something that I've already created here. Like Acid Sludge. And the ability is basically created by attaching a bunch of different abilities, like alternate damage, acid, and so forth, to the skill. So here's an example. Eye Gouge. It's going to be a melee attack, which, as my notes say, primarily going to give it to birds for pecking people's eyes out. And there's various grades that they have, like Eye Gouge 1, Eye Gouge 2, Eye Gouge 3. And these are all the attributes that they basically will have. How this is going to work, really, is I'm going to have a calculator system, which is built into the NPC generator. So a GM doesn't have to do the hard math. This is sort of like this isn't very well written algorithm. But it'll say like how much MP is worth, how the time it takes its attack action with a delay of 2 rounds. So after 2 rounds, they can use the ability again as the cooldown, basically. It criticals on a roll of 20. That should be a 12. I'm going to have to modify that. It has a tech power of 10. And it's a short range ability. Range is another thing I haven't talked about with my system. I have it designed so that it's more like Atlantic Online. Your characters are assumed to be in a formation whenever they're fighting. So you have your frontline characters with your tanks in the front who are protecting the other people in the back who are more of the range-oriented characters, the casters, the healers, and stuff like that. But different abilities have different ranges on them. Some of them are medium range, so they're range attacks. The short range ones are your close quarters combat attacks. But there's also a target as well. Like some attacks can hit a whole column of enemies or your own characters, and some of them can only hit one at a time. And that, of course, plays into the tacticals of how each formation is derived. I guess I could explain that better with an image. I'll see if I can try to attach some images to this narration here of how that works. But basically, it's a lot like Atlantic Online. A character with a spear will have some abilities that allow them to attack 2 characters at once, as long as those characters are lined up. There's a character in the front, the character in the back, so you can stab through. But swords only attack 1 character at a time. So it just makes it a little bit more tactical. Also makes it a little easier to play if you want to play by a forum. Characters aren't assumed to be miniatures all over a map. So it's, in a way, I guess it's not as tactical as 4th edition, but it still has a lot of tactics in how you're attacking characters within their formations. There's also ways that you can knock characters out of formations, so they're no longer protected by their friends, and characters that are attacked by surprise are assumed to not have yet formalized themselves into a formation. Now, formations also play a big role when you have a system here for teamwork, where you basically can have your party. Your party is assumed to function sort of like a guild, and they can have experience that your party can obtain by completing various challenges. So, like a heroic task, you get 1,000 team points, and these will level up your team. And each time your team levels up, you'll be able to get team feats. And there's various things you can do, such as cheat death. The cost of 1 team point when all team members have died, the team can avoid death. By invoking this ability, all members survive their deaths and are restored to 1 wound point and have no vitality points. That's another thing I haven't mentioned. The vitality point and wound system from Star Wars, the role-playing game, the D20 version done by Wizard of the Coast, that system is also implemented into my system, although my vitality points go a little bit higher than in that system. I like D20 Modern's use of the vitality points and wound system, so I decided to use it in this game. It's kind of like the Saga games, similar concept, and I think I've probably, I suppose I did modify it a little bit so it works a little bit more like in Saga. I just think it makes it a little bit easier when you have vitality points represented as stamina rather than actual damage to a character, and your wound points represent actual damage to a character. It allows you to give characters ability to do things like healing surges and make it actually make sense, because they're not really recovering damage to their character, they're recovering their stamina. So you can have things like second winds, for example, to let them not have to function without a healer, or they can function without a healer, and still party around. So there's also things like team roles and formations. There's tactical formations you can take on in your party, and it gives various bonuses. Like, for example, there's a box formation. All team members will stand together in a 90-degree angle, like a square, and all team members receive a +1 team bonus to their defense, but they'll take a -1 team penalty to accuracy rolls. And there's roles within a team that they can take on as well, but only 1 role can be assigned to a team member at a time. So if you have, like, the ace, this character will gain a +2 roll bonus to their accuracy rolls, and there's the mediator who will gain a +2 roll bonus to all his charm checks and other skills while being a diplomat on behalf of the team. So that's some of the major changes in my system. I've also modified some of the status effects. There's a lot more status effects and buffs and stuff like that. than used to be in the OGL, and some of them have also been removed that I think are just a bit redundant as well. There's soul gifts, which is kind of like a limit break system. Each NPC starts with like 100 soul points per day, and they can spend these soul points to basically have a limit break ability. There's a variety of stuff that they can do. They're meant for as desperation attacks. I've also made some changes to the feats. A lot of the redundant feats have been removed, such as those that basically just gave a plus 2 or 3 bonus to one particular skill. Instead, there's a generic, let's see here. I think I have it as job training, which allows you to get a talent from another class. And then there's also the skill focus, yes. I have skill focus, which allows you to choose any of your general skills, like treat injury, and get a +2 aptitude bonus to it. So there's no more of these, get a +2 to like your survival or something. All that redundancy has been removed in my system, and I've really tried to focus on feats that actually have usefulness. For crafting, instead of spending skill points on it, you instead get a feat that allows you to be a better crafter at that particular task. And your crafting level is basically equivalent to your character level +5. There's abilities that you can get that will increase your ability to craft. And there's items you can equip, of course, that will increase your crafting level as well. But for the most part, you're not really spending a bunch of skill points into like blacksmith or something. That's not part of my system. You're only spending your skill points into attack techniques and your general skills like acrobats. Not acrobatics, but let me see how I did this. Acrobatics, athletics, charm, concentration, and some of these things have also combined. Like ride and handle animal used to be 2 separate things. In my system, they're the same thing. Of course, it also varies. You have to be actually riding a mount, which is an animal. Otherwise, if you're driving a vehicle, you'd be using the use device skill to drive the vehicle, or use the magic device, or disable the device. Treat injury includes the generic stuff. Thievery includes disguise and forgery and opening locks. Your hide and your move silently are combined as one skill. These are some of the changes I've made to my system. There's been a couple other OGL systems which have done this as well. Pathfinder has sort of consolidated them. Taking climb and jump and swim, making athletics is really popular. But I've gone a little bit further, I believe, and really tried to make it a little bit more compact, and so people don't have to spend a bunch of skill points all over the damn place. Classes also tend to get a lot of bonuses in their general skills department, so most of your skill points are probably going to get spent on your weapon techniques and your spell techniques anyway. So that's pretty much my system in a nutshell. I made a few other tweaks as well here and there, but I think that as far as OGL-based games are, I think mine is probably pretty unique. I don't think a lot of other people have even tried to change the dice rolls before. I've never heard of that. And my reason for doing so, I think, is really focused on trying to get people who've never played tabletop games involved in it. Because I think when you have this array of dice, it just is a little bit overwhelming, and it's also hard to get the dice if you lose the dice. You basically have to go to a specialty store and buy it, and in a way, some dice is overpriced, in my opinion. So you should just be able to take your basic Monopoly dice, your 6-sided dice, and use that. There's really no reason why you shouldn't be able to. And so that's how my system works. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. If anybody's interested in beta testing this, I'm a little bit wary in just like releasing my documents out into the wild before I've had a chance to really play the system much myself with a bunch of people. I've never play tested this actually. Everything's been very theoretical with me making calculations by hand. So I would love to do a play test of it once I get a little bit more polished up in certain areas. Actually, you know what? I really could play test it right now and just make those corrections as they become needed. Because a lot of the stuff I really need to work on are like increasing more specializations. Some of them aren't totally fleshed out, like Ninja, for example. Doesn't have a whole bunch of different trees. They don't have a bunch of talents in their trees. I need to increase that a bit more. But you really don't need to have them part of the game in order to playtest it. The stuff that really needs the most playtesting is the calculations with characters, wearing equipment, and going against different NPCs based upon grades. I think I've got too many grades. I think I could really reduce that down to 5 and make it a much better balanced game for a GM trying to create new characters. Well, everybody, this is the essential breakdown of my system. I guess it took a little bit longer to explain it than I originally wanted to. Of course, this is all kind of rough. This I would consider my alpha playtest version 0.001 of the system, although it's definitely gone through like maybe 8 or 20 rewrites. I can't even keep track. I don't even keep track of all the rewrites I've done to various systems. When I first started designing this, the modular item system worked in a way that was a lot more complex. The MP system was way more complex. I've gone back and forth on whether I wanted characters to be able to multi-class or not. So give me guys your thoughts and your opinions. If you're interested in knowing what the lore is behind the system, the story, the mythology, and stuff like that, I've got a link in my description for my it's called Twilight Chronicles, but I'm going to be changing the title to Pandemonia Chronicles because I don't want any association with Twilight. So you can read some of that and get a real sense of how the world works. It's not very Tolkienish. It has a little bit more in common with the Chronicles of Narnia. In my opinion, I got talking animals in here, although they're sort of demons. It's also a bit of a comical fantasy. There's a lot of humor in it. There's a lot of game references and stuff like that. Hope you guys will enjoy it, and I look forward to hearing you guys' feedback on the system. Thanks.